on 27th of July 2023, Prime Minister Dato Sri Anwar launched the Madani Economy Framework here in the Securities Commission. For those, for Chinese audience and for the AI's benefit, in Malaysia we translate Madani Economy Framework to 昌明大马或者昌明大马经济，主要是首相安华的对文明社会的一个理解。Why this is important and why I want to refer to this is because the two core ideas of the framework is about raising the ceiling and raising the floor at once, doing it together, bringing the idea of raising the ceiling and raising the floor and doing it at once. This is a set of balances the Prime Minister tries to strike. The same set of equilibrium is what responsible investors and capital market try to achieve. We have to grow the cake and to share it. And to share it equitably, as equitable as possible. Here's where we need to keep in mind that the philosophical foundation of the Madani Economy Framework lies in the twin purposes of raising the ceiling and the floor at once. For too long, many believe in the trickle-down theory. They think that growth will automatically take care of the question of distribution without us having to lift a finger. And worse still, some have fallen for the idea that capitalism's only purpose is to serve the interests of the shareholders and not stakeholders. For 50 years, the Anglo-Saxon world bought into Milton Friedman's ideas that the only purpose of a corporation is to increase the returns to shareholders. But we have to rethink all this because the world is a very different place now compared to just a couple of years ago. From the time that the Soviet Union collapsed until the COVID-19 pandemic, the world was in hyper-globalization hype, which assumed that history had ended, the world was flat, and a single global supply chain was possible. If we take a even longer horizon, Asian society grew rich by exporting to the United States. I'm coming to the tariff. I know some of you want to hear about it, but I'm not going to tell you what is going to happen. I'll give you a broad sweep of what we should do. Since the end of the Second World War, Asian societies grew rich by exporting to the US, starting with Japan in the 1950s, followed by the Four Dragons, Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea in the 1960s and 1970s, followed by the Four Tiger Cups, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Thailand, and later Vietnam and China. The East Asia, if you could call it this way, or the World Bank and IMF used to call it the East Asia. The East Asia formula was essentially an export-led industrialization strategy, maximizing the demographic dividend of the then very young population across Asia. The export-led industrialization strategy, apart from requiring a young population, also presupposes the United States as the final destination of our export, and in many instances, not just the consumer of the last resort, but we would like to see the United States as the consumer of the first resort. And this export-led industrialization strategy also presupposes the race to the bottom among exporting countries to compete to destroy our environment, to suppress wages, and to offer lucrative tax incentive to foreign investors at the expense of the state capacity to ensure the social well-being of its citizenry. That strategy will continue as long as the United States is prepared to be the consumer of the last resort or the first resort. Yet over the past decade, starting with Trump 1 and followed by the Biden years, and in hindsight, the Biden years look more like Trump 1.5 as far as trade is concerned, and now we are entering Trump 2. The United States clearly is not prepared to continue to import so much compared to the years before. And this is manifested in the Trump tariff, but also in a bipartisan sentiment in the United States. So we have to confront the new reality that we just can't export our way to prosperity. To continue to prosper, our societies, Malaysia and ASEAN, will now have to create the market in order to consume what we produce. Of course, there are talks about diversifying market. There are talks about diversifying market to other jurisdictions, which is important, which is what we are doing and what we are working very hard on. But we cannot assume that if other societies are poor, they will be able to import as much of our produce from us. And that, I think, is a very important equation that we have to keep in mind. That we must ensure that we create markets, we create people who have the money to consume what we produce. And this is where Malaysia and ASEAN will have to now ensure our own citizens in our region has a dynamic middle class. Only with a large middle class that our people would be able to spend and to sustain our industries. When we look back into history, 2001 was a watershed year, with September 11 and the responses of the United States shaping the geopolitical scenario for 2 decades. And also in 2001, the other equally consequential event was China joining the WTO that year. When we look back in the next 20 years, by 2045, when we look back, we may say that 2025 could be seen as the watershed year when all previous calculus and assumptions were thrown out of the window and new ones being adopted. Malaysia and ASEAN must not be mere bystander, but to be an active participant in shaping the new order of our nation, our region, and the world. We all know what we have to deal with now. First, we cannot just rely on the United States being the consumer of the last resort, therefore we need to diversify our market. Second, we cannot just diversify the market to export to the rest of the world if they are not rich enough to consume our produce. Third, in order for our produce to be consumed, we have to ensure that they are consumers. And if they are none, we have to create them by making our people richer and becoming a middle-class society and hoping that ASEAN will grow richer too. Fourth, we are doing all this in a time when society are aging fast. Therefore, we must ensure that Malaysians and the people of ASEAN get rich before we get old. Getting rich before getting old is an important challenge for every one of us, especially for middle-aged people like me. But you can't be rich being a government official. Fifth, at the same time, we have a global political crisis of populism. As society are getting very unequal, thus those who have nothing as well as those who have nothing to lose become very agitated. A world or a nation with many people who feel dispossessed do not make good political and economic senses. We can circle back to the earlier point that we need consumers and we need our people to be middle class to be consumers. Therefore, we need to pay better and narrow the wealth gap in our society in order to deal with populism as well. And all these are happening when there's a climate challenge and a climate crisis, which continues to cause economic losses and disastrous displacement each time a flood, a forest fire, or a typhoon hits. The annual cross-border haze that clouds our city now is also a clear reminder that this is a constant challenge that we have to face. When we speak about Madani and its objective to raise the ceiling and to raise the floor at once, it is really about dealing with the challenges of our time and to build a compassionate economy, not just because it is ethically desirable, not just because it's morally desirable, but more importantly, it is economically sound. Together with my Indonesian counterpart, I'm chairing the ASEAN Geo-Economic Task Force to look at 3 challenges. Pastor Rebecca is our part of our expert team. First, the Trump tariff and its implication and impacts. Second, the second-order effect from the Trump tariff and how industrialized Asian economies could avoid flooding each other's market and wipe out the industrial capacities and capabilities in our societies, which I'll come back to shortly. Third, most importantly, to consider the future of ASEAN integration. Not many people are familiar with the potential second-order effect. Trump imposed a 50% tariff on steel and aluminium on 12th of March. And we are already seeing an impact. The second-order effect is such that particularly iron and steel producers, China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, are already seeing surge of different products in our market. We are competing to export to each other the existing capacity that was originally destined for the United States. So this second order effect is serious, and we would like to look at it in a serious manner, and we also want to draw attention to the question of second order effect. And when it comes to sustainable and green products, we are facing a situation where Malaysia, for a short period of time, saw huge investment into solar panels with the aim of exporting to the United States by Chinese companies. But with the high tariff imposed by the Biden administration in November 2024, some of them have already pulled out. Those existing in Malaysia now are facing competition from China. So these are Chinese-owned solar panel producers in Malaysia with the ecosystem of Malaysia, but they are facing a challenge by Chinese exporters, because Chinese exporters get export rebate, and also they are producing at a much bigger scale, therefore cheaper. So these are the challenges that we will have to deal with. These are the trade challenges that we will deal with when we talk about green transition. Now here, we're at SC. What can the capital market do to bring forth a prosperous and sustainable ASEAN with a strong middle class? The key is to create, ASEAN technologies and to create ASEAN multinationals. Very often we are stuck in the old mind frame. We think that Malaysia and ASEAN have no technologies, and therefore we could only depend on foreign technologies. This is not exactly true. If we invest sufficiently and if we channel the capital market into the directions of investing in technologies and not into creating more real estate bubbles, and this is my comment that not everyone likes. I think we have too much of real estate bubbles and too much of real estate companies, including the GLC and GLICs are too interested in real estate and not interested in technology, or not interested in technologies enough. But it's time for the capital market to see this, that we want to see the rise of ASEAN technologies. As Prime Minister Anwar said at the first anniversary of the National Semiconductor Strategy last week, Malaysia is the indispensable middle in the global technological landscape, and because of Malaysia's neutrality, Malaysia's technology is meaningful to the US, to us, and also to other partners in the world, because we are not competing at the highest level, but we are indispensable in the middle. We should also see ourselves, Malaysia and Malaysian technological companies, as creating technologies for the bottom billions of the world's population. We often also talk about helping SMEs. As Dr. Faiz said, very often SMEs are the loudest when it comes to complaints. But in actual fact, it is time for us to think about creating Malaysian multinationals. We're in two extremes. We're thinking about helping the SMEs, but in actual fact, we also help foreign multinationals investing in Malaysia. But this is the time to really think about growing Malaysian MNCs and growing ASEAN MNCs. There's a gap where we do not feel. We are not doing enough to create Malaysian and ASEAN technological-based MNCs. The capital market may need to think about the future of Malaysian companies and their roles very differently. We need to see more Malaysian companies with technologies growing to become ASEAN MNCs, and eventually with some global footprint in the next 20 years. ASEAN should have a mini Samsung or a mini Huawei or a mini TSMC, perhaps in green technologies. We live in a very different phase in global history, and it is time for all of us to be bold to shape the capital market and the region, if not the world, with new ideas. Ideas that will create sustainable economies and societies where people are prosperous and fulfilled, and some form of a Madani economy, a civilized society, can be achieved. I'm confident that the SIDC and CASI SRI Conference 2025 today will spark discussions and facilitate the exchange of ideas among capital market stakeholders and the larger business community. I hope it will result in greater collaboration in investment communities, especially in areas that could preserve our planet for the sake of our future generations. Together, let us chart a path towards sustainable, vibrant, and resilient future for Malaysia and ASEAN. Thank you very much. I wish you well and a fruitful conference.
Thank you, Yang Berhormat. Please do